Hello again. One of the animals I was interested to sort of share some information about on the podcast is the hyena. And the reason is that hyenas are probably the most misunderstood and misrepresented animal, certainly that you'd find in Africa. And if you look at literature and folklore, they get a really bad rap, and they're pretty much, I wouldn't go as far as to say that they're despised, but they are definitely down in that neck of the woods with most people. They're seen as these scavengers, cowardly, not particularly intelligent. And there's also, if you look at folklore, there's associations with the supernatural and all sorts of stuff with witches and who knows what, werewolves, all this kind of thing. And even today, with the media we have, if you think of The Lion King, now I watched it a long time ago, so I have to remember, but I know it's, this kind of common representation. Again, it's quite sort of sneaky. So I guess that would sort of point to intelligence, which is correct, but it's definitely not the hero of the show, shall we say, which tends to be the lion. And that's quite amusing for exactly the same reasons that the lion is also quite misrepresented in common culture, let's say. So let's dive in a little bit, and I'll just talk about the hyenas. And there are actually 4 species, but what are they? So where does the group of hyenas sit? Because they look a little bit like a dog, but they, in fact, are not very closely related to dogs. Obviously, they're mammals. They're closer in many ways to cats. Probably the closest group of animals are things like the mongoose. That would be the closest group to them evolutionary, but they are a group on their own. They've gone through quite a range of evolution. I'm not going to go through all of that, mainly because it's probably not that relevant. The relevant stuff is that there are 4 species of hyena alive today. Now, 3 of them are in a group that was referred or has been referred to or is referred to the bone crushers. So they're the ones we tend to think of. And the other one is the aardwolf. So that is down in the southern tip of Africa, in South Africa and Namibia. And the aardwolf is basically an insectivore. So it eats insects. So that's not one that people would tend to think about when you talk about hyenas, but it is number 4 in the group. And that's pretty much all I'm going to say about it, because I really wanted to focus on the hyenas that you're more likely to know about. So what are they? Well, the first one is the spotted hyena. Now, this is the animal that you're most likely to think of when somebody mentions a hyena. It's also known as the laughing hyena. So that's the one that most people will know of. And that's found throughout sub-Saharan Africa and down almost to the south. So it kind of gets into northern Namibia, the very northern parts of South Africa, but not all the way to the south. I'm going to come back to the spotted hyena because that's the one I really want to spend most time talking about. There are a couple of other bone-crushing hyena subspecies, though. The first one is the striped hyena. So this one is found throughout northern Africa, so northern eastern Africa, up to about Tanzania, and then in areas of the Middle East and into Southwest Asia. So that includes most of India. So that's where you're going to find that. That one is near threatened. So it's not in deep trouble, but it is an animal that could potentially get under threat. And this one is primarily a scavenger. So that one will fit to some extent the kind of common view of hyenas. It's quite a pretty animal, I think, but there you go. The striped hyena and also the brown hyena, which I'll talk about in a moment, are known as facultative scavengers. So that's not easy to say after a couple of glasses of wine, but that means they're a scavenger that will tend to scavenge when there's no food available to hunt. So they tend to spend most of their time scavenging. The brown hyena is the other bone crusher, so the third one. And that shares a range pretty much with the aardwolf. So down in Namibia, South Africa, and Botswana, down in that southern tip of Africa. So I'm going to go back to the spotted hyena because that is quite an interesting animal. Now, where some of the misunderstandings of hyena come from, first of all, are telling male and female apart, because the female hyena has evolved some quite interesting genitalia. I'm not going to go into much detail on this because I just want to make this kind of more of a generally available podcast. But basically, using the traditional method of looking at genitalia, it's much harder to, in fact, it's almost impossible to tell male and female apart, at least by looking, because the female genitalia has evolved so that it looks very much like the male. And that has led to a lot of the misunderstandings about the animal and thinking it's maybe a hermaphrodite or it can change sex, or all of these kind of stories that come about. I mean, even in Roman times, hyenas were misunderstood that way. What it means in reality, though, for hyenas is that it does make it very difficult. It makes it much more difficult for them to mate. It does mean that they can't be forced. A male can't forcibly mate with a female. They both have to be involved in the process. But it does mean that something in the region, or it's thought that something in the region of 10% of females die in childbirth because the birth canal is quite long. It's got an interesting kink in it. And also a significant number of the young hyenas are dead in childbirth because of this strange evolutionary tack that the hyenas have taken for whatever reason. So that is one of the, I guess, notable features of the hyena. And there's quite a lot of material online if you're interested in understanding that further. I won't go any further with it here. But it has most definitely contributed to this misunderstanding of the animal. Now, the easy way you can actually separate male and female in terms of just identifying which is which is by looking at them, because if they're side by side, the female is much larger and it's also much more aggressive. So hyenas have a very strongly matriarchal society, and so it is the female comes first. The female will dominate. They have first pick of the food. Males are very much the sort of bottom end of that society, and they'll get what's left once females have eaten, and the cubs that the females are looking after have eaten, and the males, particularly any that are kind of have a loose affiliation with the group, will tend to eat last. So that's not a great place to be from their perspective, and definitely not the usual kind of setup in a mammal society. The other thing about hyenas is they can live in quite large groups. I've seen numbers 80, 160, that sort of thing, which is very large groups, and even bigger, in fact. They can come together in much, much larger groups. But they also have a lot of subgroups that is more the day-to-day. So in many ways, their society, if you think of it in those terms, is very similar to ours, whereas we have small groups, obviously families and partners, that sort of thing. And then sort of larger groups, which if you think of the tribal setup, these days for certainly Western civilization, you can picture examples of a tribal setup by looking at football supporters, say, or rugby or whatever it might be. But where you come together is a group, and you have a clear identity that separates you from other similar groups, and that's a tribal setup in many ways. We have that kind of setup, and then we have cities and much broader groups. So hyena society, if that's not the wrong word to use, but it's set up in much the same way. So there is a quite a complex setup with them, and it definitely follows the trend of mammal society. Now, another thing that is I think a lot of people don't know about is that intellectually hyenas are quite smart. With studies of their brain, the frontal part of the brain has shown a development that's probably closer to primates, or that is close to primates than cats, dogs, any other mammal family. And they have been shown to be very intelligent, and they'll work well together in groups. And there was a study, and I've forgotten the lady who ran it, but I have seen it. I think it was on Netflix. But there was a comparison between hyenas, and I think this was chimpanzees. I'm trying to remember now. But it's definitely been found that in tests where, in order to get food, you have to think through. In other words, you can't use brute force to get the food. In some studies, hyenas have performed better than chimpanzees. So we tend to regard chimpanzees as being very intelligent, along with dolphins and, with us in the mammal group. But hyenas are also an animal to take quite seriously in that situation. And how that's worked for them in terms of hunting is that they can hunt in groups. They will tend to hunt more in groups than alone. And they can take down quite large prey. So buffalo, they will take down, zebra they'll hunt. And in fact, the spotted hyena actually hunts most of its prey. It will hunt, it's in the order of 90% of their prey is hunted. In fact, as a proportion, that's higher than lions. So lions are more likely to try and steal prey from hyenas than the other way around, although obviously that happens. So this idea of a cowardly animal that just scavenges and tries to steal food from other predators is actually quite the reverse when it comes to hyenas. I'm not going to go into any detail, I think, because it's quite gross, but it always can be upsetting for people because nature, once you start looking at things in nature and how animals kill, some animals make a real meal of it, not to use a pun, but hyenas are one of those animals. It can be quite distressing to watch hyenas killing another animal. It can take a while and it's extremely unpleasant. However, because of their intelligence, they're able to take down prey, and they are very effective hunters. So it's just something to bear in mind that hyenas, and particularly the spotted hyena, is quite an intelligent animal. It's quite a smart predator. Now, hyenas generally don't prey on people. They have been known. It has been known to happen. But it's actually quite rare. However, hyenas are the mammal that probably eats more people in Africa than any other animal. But that's not to say kill them. So they will scavenge on human remains. And in fact, going back to human evolution, where people are trying to put together, who was living with who, in certainly the early days of human evolution when, following the current accepted theory that we came out of Africa, or primarily came out of Africa. It's believed that one of the ideas, I guess, or speculations about why humans and hyenas hate each other so much, I don't know, probably the wrong word, but is that they do sort of tend to sit in the same kind of area, will tend to go after similar prey. We are both capable of running down our prey. I mean, if you look at how the human body has evolved, it's actually evolved so that we can run. And we're one of only two mammals that sweat. Horses sweat as well, but no other animal sweats. Someone can prove me wrong. No issue with that, but that's my understanding of it. And the reason that sweating is so important, certainly for us, is that it means that we can run. That when you think of other mammals, when they start running out of breath, they start to pant. And animals, so they pant in order to cool down, but that then stops them taking in a lot of air. It's a different breathing or way of breathing, if you like, to what we would do on a run. So when you're breathing normally, you're obviously breathing in through your nose and mouth. Animals that have to pant are having to use the nose and mouth as a way of just cooling down, which means they can't run. So they have to stop and pant. I mean, think of your dog on a hot summer's day after a walk. They don't run around so much when they get too hot because they have to pant to cool down. So humans have evolved to run down their prey, and hyenas are actually evolved as well with that, the way their forelegs are longer than their back legs. That's evolved to allow them to run. It's kind of a loping stride, but that's what it does. So basically, humans and hyenas are in many ways competing for the same prey. And going back to the remains of hominids and early people that have been found, a lot of them have a lot of the remains are gone. It's kind of teeth and bits of bone, but that tends to be what you have left when you've been through a hyena's digestive system. And also looking at some of the remains of animals that have been found, or bones that have been found, there's marks from tools and also bite marks from hyenas. So somewhere we were both having to go at the same carcass. So that relationship with hyenas has been there a long time. And that probably also goes some way to explaining why hyenas figure so much in folklore and why they're seen in many ways as kind of like the boogeyman, or it's, they're this supernatural element that I spoke about before, that can possibly be explained to some extent by us going after the same prey. So they are always a threat. We're always competing with them. So they're been an enemy for a very long time in that sense. So that is pretty much what I wanted to talk about. It's been quite a short podcast, but I hope you found that interesting. Hyenas are interesting animals. Fulfilling that role of eating carrion is very important for both just the cycle of life, food, things growing and dying and growing, being eaten and ending up back in the ground is an important part of that. And obviously by eating dead meat, they're reducing the chances of disease, because as things rot, you get all sorts of nasty things growing in there which you really don't want to get in your system. So scavengers, and that's all scavengers, fulfill actually a very important role when it comes to keeping a whole ecosystem healthy. So hyenas definitely fulfill a very important role, but equally, the spotted hyena in particular is sort of much maligned and much misrepresented, and it is important to understand where they sit in the cycle of things. And in many ways, they're on a par with lions. They're definitely smarter than lions, by the way. Although lions have this, we've given them this image of the Lion King and all this stuff. They're often not the sharpest tool in the box when it comes to being successful in their environment. And hyenas are very adaptive. They're very intelligent. They do have that aggression. There is a lot of even aggression within communities. And in some ways that also, I guess, reflects our society. We will tend to do that too. But they are, I guess, in many ways closer to us in their behaviours than we might imagine and perhaps might be comfortable with. So anyway, that's it. It's quite a short podcast, but I hope you found it interesting. I hope it at least makes you rethink or look at hyenas in a different way. And as I've said, there's a lot of information on the web, not as much as you might find with other animals, because hyenas haven't been that well studied. They're not top of too many people's favourite animal list, but they are definitely very interesting animals if you spare the time. And I think certainly in recent years and certainly recent decades, there's been much more interest in them, and we're really starting to understand them far better than we used to. And I think they're beginning to get at least very slowly, they're getting the recognition, the acknowledgement for where they sit in the food chain, in the whole ecosystem, and the contribution they make to it. So I will speak to you again on the next podcast. That's it from me. Bye for now. Oh, and one thing just before you go, please take a look at the 2026 wildlife calendar. That's available now. It's on the website. There's a link below the description of this podcast episode. So please take a look, and I'll speak to you next time. Bye now.